Imagine the scene. It's the middle of the night in Montecito, California. The air is warm, the crickets are loud, and inside a multi-million-dollar mansion, a phone begins to buzz. On the other end of that line is a man who just hours earlier held one of the most prestigious titles in the history of the British Empire. Now, he's a man with no status, no honors, and a name that has been scrubbed from the royal registers. It was Andrew Mountbatten Windsor calling Meghan Markle. The message was short, sharp, and terrifying. They're coming for the titles. This wasn't just a family dispute. This was a declaration of war from the palace. Andrew had just been officially stripped of his last remaining honors by the king, and the shockwaves of that decision were already crossing the Atlantic. The royal family has just experienced an enormous surprise that took everyone by storm, but the true horror wasn't just in the headlines, it was in what Andrew revealed to Meghan in that late-night conversation. What exactly did Andrew say that left Meghan so taken aback? And how did a disgraced prince, hiding behind the walls of a crumbling mansion, manage to create such significant turmoil for the entire royal family? To understand the fear in Meghan's eyes and the fury in King Charles's heart, we have to look at the intricate tales of drama, familial conflicts, and the memoir that changed everything. For years, the world had heard the name Virginia Giuffre. She had been sharing her story about Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, and the powerful men who, she said, hurt her for decades. But the world wasn't prepared for what happened after her death. It wasn't until her book, Nobody's Girl, was published in October 2025 that the British royal family truly faced its day of reckoning. She described meeting the prince at Ghislaine Maxwell's London home, where Maxwell, acting like a twisted fairy godmother, told her that just like Cinderella, she would meet a handsome prince that night. But the reality was far from a fairy tale. According to the memoir, Andrew had correctly guessed her age and then mentioned that his own daughters were only slightly younger. It was a detail that made everything that followed feel all the more disturbing. This wasn't just a legal accusation. It was an emotional autopsy of a man's character. What made the memoir particularly damaging wasn't just the allegations of what happened behind closed doors, but the emotional authenticity and the specific details Virginia provided about Andrew's behavior. She wrote that the prince seemed to believe that having his way was his birthright, an entitled attitude that she had thought about every single day in the years since, but there was more. The book alleged that Andrew's team had tried to hire internet trolls to harass her during their legal battle, and that he had attempted to use his security personnel to dig up dirt on her. Most devastatingly, she wrote about how Andrew had made it nearly impossible for her lawyers to serve him papers by fleeing to Queen Elizabeth's Balmoral Castle in Scotland. He was hiding behind the well-guarded gates of a fortress while a young woman was begging for the truth. The timing of the memoir's release couldn't have been worse for the royal family. King Charles was already struggling with his own health challenges following a cancer diagnosis, and the monarchy was working overtime to maintain public support. The graphic nature of the allegations, combined with the sympathy generated by Virginia's tragic death, created a perfect storm. It was a controlled detonation that forced the king's hand in ways no one had anticipated. For Andrew, it was the beginning of a desperate, ugly attempt to hold on to the only life he had ever known. Even as the pressure mounted, he initially refused to accept the reality of his situation. 4 days before the book hit the shelves, he announced he would voluntarily relinquish his Duke of York title. He thought this preemptive move would satisfy the critics and let him keep his mansion. He claimed he was putting duty to family and country first while still vigorously denying everything. But the gesture was too little, too late. Behind the scenes, Andrew was fighting tooth and nail to maintain his privileged lifestyle at Royal Lodge. This is a 30-room mansion on the Windsor estate that he's lived in since 2003. He had signed a 75-year lease back then, paying just $1 million up front. Now, with King Charles, determined to evict him, Andrew was searching for any legal technicality to stay. He turned the mansion into a fortress, refusing to leave and making extraordinary demands in exchange for his quiet exit. Sources close to the family say he wanted a massive financial settlement. Some say as much as $99 million before he would even think about packing a bag. He didn't just want the money, he wanted a full-time staff, including a cook, a gardener, a housekeeper, and a driver. He even demanded round-the-clock police protection at his new residence, despite no longer holding an official royal position. The standoff dragged on for weeks. Andrew knew that the longer he held out, the more leverage he had, but the house was literally rotting around him. Reports suggested the property was in such poor condition, filled with dampness, peeling paint, and structural issues that he might not receive a single cent in compensation once the cost of repairs was factored in. It was a pathetic sight, a man who once had unlimited access to the world's resources now arguing over repair bills for a house he was being kicked out of. For King Charles, the decision to finally strip his brother of everything was one of the most painful choices of his reign. They had shared a childhood and a lifetime of experiences. Charles knew that losing his titles meant Andrew was losing his entire identity. But by late 2025, the king understood that small actions were no longer an option. The public was angry. Surveys showed that the majority of British people wanted Andrew gone for good. But the real pressure was coming from inside the house, specifically from Prince William. William had been asking for strong action against his uncle for years. He knew that one day he would be king, and for the monarchy to survive, it had to be respected. To William, keeping Andrew in the family was sending the wrong message about accountability. He told his father that they needed to fix the situation before it could hurt William's own future. So, on October 30th, 2025, Buckingham Palace released a statement that would change history. It was brief and devastating. The king had initiated a formal process to remove Andrew's style, titles, and honors. He would no longer be known as Prince Andrew. He was now just Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. The choice to use a special legal document called letters patent was a shock to royal experts. It was the first time since the abdication of 1936 that a high-ranking royal had been so openly pushed aside. The palace statement was carefully worded, saying these actions were necessary even though Andrew still denied the accusations. This was key. The king wasn't acting because Andrew admitted guilt. He was acting because the association with Jeffrey Epstein was so toxic, it was poisoning the entire crown. But the loss of status had very real, very expensive consequences. Andrew's security team, which he used to get for free, would now have to be paid for out of the king's private pocket if the king chose to pay it all. Most importantly, Andrew was told he had to move to a simple, humble home on the Sandringham estate. While Andrew was packing his bags, the news was causing a different kind of panic in Montecito. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle were watching the events unfold with growing alarm. They saw the speed and the cold-blooded efficiency with which the king had handled his own brother. For Meghan, the implications were terrifying. If a king could take away a title a man was born with, what did that mean for the Duke and Duchess of Sussex brand? Harry and Meghan had stepped back in 2020 and agreed to stop using their Royal Highness styling, but the titles of Duke and Duchess were central to their media and business ventures. Sources say Meghan was panicked and defiant, telling friends that no one's taking my Duchess away. The timing was unsettling because their relationship with the king was already fractured. Meghan allegedly understood immediately that a precedent had been set. If Charles could remove a dukedom from his brother, Harry's titles were no longer secure. And while Harry is the king's son, Prince William, who will one day hold that same power, is known to hold deep resentments about the couple's public criticisms. The fear in the Sussex household wasn't just about a name. It was about the loss of the very platforms and opportunities that made their California life viable. Without the titles, the entire dynamic of their public presence would shift. They would go from being royals in exile to just another celebrity couple in a crowded market. But as the Sussexes worried about their future, a new storm was brewing back at Clarence house, one that involved the king and queen themselves. Picture this. It's 9:15 on a gray London morning. Behind the imposing doors, an emergency session has been called in absolute secrecy. The king's legal advisors and senior courtiers are present, their faces drained of color. The king's private secretary is holding a folder marked confidential domestic action. The air is so thick, you could hear a pin drop. And then, King Charles, his voice cracking, reportedly delivered the words that would echo through history. I intend to separate from Queen Camilla. It was a moment of absolute silence. Witnesses say the king's hand shook as he spoke. This wasn't a decision made lightly. It was a man on the edge of emotional collapse. What could drive a man who spent 30 years defending Camilla to take such a step? What could shatter a bond that had survived public hatred, scandals, and the shadow of Princess Diana? The answer reportedly lay in a damning intelligence report delivered just 8 days earlier. The dossier allegedly detailed media manipulation linked directly to Camilla manipulation, cloaked in strategy that Charles felt was a betrayal of their trust. If true, this would be the first royal divorce of a sitting sovereign since the days of Henry VIII. The monarchy has weathered abdications and public splits before, but this was different. This was happening while the king was already facing a health crisis and the institution was under intense scrutiny. It wasn't just personal, it was existential. But while the king was dealing with the betrayal of his wife, the ghost of Andrew's past continued to haunt him. This time, it was through the words of his former staff. The fall of a royal is never quiet, but Andrew's fall was particularly noisy because of people like Charlotte Briggs. She entered Buckingham Palace in 1996 as a 21-year-old from Yorkshire, thinking she had the job of a lifetime. She cleaned offices and shared small moments with royals who were actually kind, like Prince Edward. But then came the assignment no one wanted serving Prince Andrew. He was 36 at the time, newly divorced from Sarah Ferguson, and living on the nursery floor of the palace. Despite being a military veteran, his behavior was that of a spoiled, angry child. Charlotte recalled her first taste of his temper, a rant over curtains. Andrew was sitting just a few feet away, but instead of closing them himself, he made her run up and down the stairs to adjust them. When a tiny sliver of light peeked through the top, he exploded, barking at her. "Can't you do anything right?" Charlotte was left in tears, shocked that something so trivial could provoke such rage. But it wasn't just the temper, it was the hypocrisy. Here was a man who fought in the Falklands but couldn't close a curtain. And then there were the teddy bears. It sounds like a joke, but for the staff, it was a nightmare. Andrew reportedly had a collection of 50 or 60 stuffed toys on his bed. The maids were given a laminated diagram showing exactly where each bear had to go. If one was out of order, he would erupt in fury. The stories from the staff painted a portrait of a man consumed by entitlement. Even Sarah Ferguson was part of the strange atmosphere. Despite their divorce, Andrew reportedly kept her wedding dress in his wardrobe and her makeup neatly laid out on his dressing table, as if she might walk back in at any moment. For the staff, it was unsettling. They saw a man who couldn't let go of the past and who treated the people serving him with zero humanity. These stories didn't come out in 1996. They surfaced in 2022 and 2025, just as Andrew's life was imploding under the weight of the Jeffrey lawsuit. Against that backdrop, Charlotte's memories reinforced the narrative that Andrew was a bad apple who had been the architect of his own downfall. But the final devastating blow to Andrew's reputation didn't come from a book or a maid. It came from a 7-second video. On September 16th, 2025, the royal family gathered for the funeral of the Duchess of Kent. It was a somber day with everyone dressed in black and embodying the weight of royal duty. But outside St. George's Chapel, a camera caught a brief exchange between Andrew and Sarah Ferguson. For a few seconds, Andrew appeared relaxed, even amused. He was laughing at a funeral. Within hours, the clip had millions of views. The public outrage was immediate. The headlines called it a stunning lapse of judgment and an optical nightmare. Within 48 hours, King Charles, Prince William, and Princess Anne held a private meeting. The funeral video was the tipping point. The 7-second mistake proved to the king that Andrew would never understand the gravity of his situation. He was a man who lived in a bubble of his own making, and that bubble had finally burst. The king's decision to move Andrew to a smaller cottage was a clear sign that the era of luxury was over. The monarchy was moving toward a future focused on service, not scandal. But this shift has created a monarchy in transition caught between centuries of tradition and the relentless glare of modern media. The world no longer waits for official palace statements. It reacts in real time to viral hashtags and social media clips. And in that environment, someone like Andrew is a liability that the king could no longer afford to carry. For the York family, the financial and reputational loss is total. Royal Lodge, once their sanctuary, is now under status review. The king's advisors are looking at the millions it costs to maintain money that few believe Andrew can actually provide. Whispers are growing louder that the house will soon be empty. But this isn't just about one house or one prince. It's about a king who is willing to make the toughest choices imaginable to save the institution he leads. Charles has been described as a cold-blooded reformer, someone who is willing to cut out the rot even if that rot is his own brother or his own wife. It's a bold, unprecedented step that redefines what the royal family represents in the 21st century. But the move to Sandringham isn't just a change of address, it's a psychological erasure. Sources close to the estate describe the new home as a modest three-bedroom cottage that hasn't seen a renovation since the late 20th century. For a man who lived like a king in a 30-room palace, the silence of the Norfolk countryside will be deafening. There are no grand hallways for his collection of teddy bears, no army of staff to adjust his curtains, and certainly no gated fortress to hide behind. It is a quiet, drafty exile. For the public, this is exactly the kind of poetic justice they've been waiting for. It's the final visual proof that the era of royal immunity is over. The favorite son is now just another resident of the English countryside living on a pension and a prayer. However, the most chilling part of this transition isn't coming from the king himself, but from the man standing directly behind him. Royal insiders are now whispering about the William doctrine. It's becoming increasingly clear that while Charles signs the papers, it's Prince William who is providing the iron will. William has reportedly made it clear that any loose ends, meaning anyone who brings scandal or embarrassment to the crown, will be dealt with swiftly and without sentiment. He isn't interested in family dinners or sentimental reconciliations. He is interested in the survival of the firm. He sees the monarchy as a business that must be modernized, and that means cutting away the fat no matter how much it hurts. This is why the mood in Montecito has shifted from annoyance to genuine panic. If the William doctrine is now the law of the land, then Harry and Meghan are essentially living on borrowed time. The legal precedent set with Andrew has stripped away the myth that royal titles are permanent birthrights. They are now quite literally at the pleasure of the king. As the dust settles on Andrew's spectacular fall, the world is watching to see who the next target of this new ruthless monarchy will be. The shadow of the crown has never been longer. And for those who have stepped outside its light, the darkness is starting to feel very cold indeed. So, as Andrew prepares to move into his humble cottage and Meghan Markle watches from her California mansion, the question remains, what is the true cost of a crown? Is it the money, the titles, or the family bonds that are sacrificed along the way? The story of Andrew Mountbatten Windsor is a cautionary tale about the dangers of entitlement and the speed at which a handsome prince can become a commoner. It's a story of memoirs, secret dossiers, and the high-stakes game of survival that is the British monarchy. As we look at the wreckage of Andrew's career, we have to wonder who will be next. Because in this new version of the royal family, no one, not even a duke and not even a queen, is safe. Which of these royal stories affected you the most? Do you believe King Charles made the right decision about Andrew? Or should family loyalty have come first? Does the idea of a commoner, Andrew, make the monarchy feel more modern, or does it take away the mystery that keeps the institution alive? And what about the Sussexes? Is their fear of losing their titles justified, or are they just overreacting to a necessary house cleaning? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. We want to hear your perspective on this historic shift. If you found this story as shocking as we did, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into the world of the royals. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You won't want to miss what we've uncovered about the secret life of the king's inner circle. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.